Don't hold too closely to the specifics of the dream. Hold to the concept of the dream. And I would even say it's probably going to be bigger and better than you imagined.
UnLost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. Today, we're joined by Joe Bassett, founder and lead guide at Valiant Outfitters, a wilderness adventure and guided backpacking company. Joe's first experience, the smallest ember of this idea of being in the outdoors as a teenager in high school, before he turned his lost cause into an unlost cause in his 50s by starting Valiant Outfitters. Joe, welcome to UnLost Cause.
Thanks, David. I'm really looking forward to it. Part of what we do at Valiant is a passion to get people that are 50 plus doing new things that they haven't done before. So I think this is going to be a good fit.
Well, that's excellent. This show is definitely in your demographic. I'm certainly in your demographic as well. So let's start by, can you level set with the audience? What does Valiant Outfitters do in maybe 2 to 3 sentences? Because we're going to go very deep, but just level set for the foundation.
The level set is we get people out in the wilderness, get them to experience the benefits cognitively, emotionally, and physically of spending time outside. One of the things that I'm fond of saying is nobody ever said my New Year's resolution is to spend more time inside.
And when you're doing this, is it like guided activities like these wilderness hikes, or is it lake houses, or what type of activities? Because outside can be defined in so many different ways.
We have 2 that we emphasize. One is guided backpacking trips, full experience. We don't do portage. We don't carry. In fact, it was my small business advisor who, when I was starting the other part, the survival training part of it, he said to me, hey, there are people that will pay for you to go out in the woods with them and take them backpacking. And I said, they'd pay for that? It's just walking in the woods. And I said, we're not going to carry people's gear. They're going to have to carry their own gear. And sure enough, people want that full experience. We'll start with people who've never been outside before, and we'll train with them, go out for short 2 or 3 hour hikes where they can get accustomed to carrying a pack. And then the idea is to get them to 1 or 2 overnights. And then ultimately what we're after is to launch them into their own life of spending time outside. But it's all in pretty austere conditions and in the backcountry. There's no car camping, bike camping. It's all backpacking or our survival training.
I love it. So no glamping for the Valiant Outfitters.
No, though there is a glamping organization that is here in the same county with us. And one of the things that we've started to offer is, and this is, well, I guess it could be for the over 50 crowd if they're, looking at a marriage later in life, but we started to receive requests for bachelor wilderness parties. And I wasn't looking to get into, guys out banging on drums and getting drunk in the woods. No, they want the full survival experience. They want to go out there and get the same type of training that they'd get in anything else. And we started working with some bridal shows, and I started to get women saying, hey, we'd like to do this too. So we've been looking to partner with them to do a little bit of glamping along with that. But no, we don't do the glamping. You come back pretty dirty and smelling pretty rank from one of our adventures.
That's great. And when you and I were going back and forth, it sounded like you had your love of being out in the outdoors starting in childhood. So can you share with the audience, what was your childhood like and what was your outdoors experience as a kid?
My outdoor experience started very early. In fact, I don't remember it, but there are stories of my parents in upstate New York, over in the Finger Lakes region in western New York, in January, when I would have been 6 or 7 months old, and they're out tobogganing, and I was bundled up in, a little child's bassinet alongside of the trail, nose red, and outside for hours doing that. And then I can remember at maybe 5 or 6 years old, little old lady standing on the shore of Seneca Lake up in the Finger Lakes, upset with my dad that I was out in a rowboat by myself in the lake. And I could only do one oar at a time, so I just keep going in circles. So I can't remember a time not being outside.
Got it. So tell me about the family dynamic. So it sounds like your folks really enjoyed that and encouraged that. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. My dad was very involved with scouting. He's a Salvation Army officer, what they call a pastor in the Salvation Army's church. And he was integral to the relationship between the Salvation Army and Boy Scouts of America. In fact, I'll say his name is legend in the Salvation Army and Boy Scouting circles. So, very much that hunting, fishing, just any time outside. Most of our vacations when I would have been like a teenager or even a little bit younger would have been outside camping, car camping mostly. Again, I would have spent most of that time in my own tent. I was usually up before the rest of the family. I'd be out on the lake and I'd catch, smallmouth bass and bring that back in for breakfast. Even at 12 or 13 years old, Mom would drive me out to a trail and I'd be gone for a night. Their thing, they never said it this way, but now that I'm older and I look back, their idea wasn't to keep me as safe as possible. It was to keep me as safe as necessary.
Yeah.
And let me experience the outdoors that way.
Yeah, it's certainly different these days. Like, hey, you got to have your bear spray. You might have to have an emergency beacon and all this. Maybe an Apple, tag on you, to AirPod tag to see where you're at. But that's awesome that your folks were so willing to expose you so that you can experience that. And did you have siblings that you explored with, or was this, or maybe best buddies in the neighborhood that you'd go out with, or is this more Joe being solo?
There's 5 years between, I'm the oldest. There's 5 years between my brother and myself, and then 5 years between he and my sister. But we would be out there together when we go out as families. My brother was also a Boy Scout. He's the one who ended up being the Eagle Scout. I never made Eagle Scout. I was within 2 merit badges and a service project of being Eagle Scout, and then I discovered girls.
I was about to say, you're so close.
No, you can't get much closer than that. But it was mainly solo. And I'll even go so far as, and I don't advocate this lifestyle for, if there is anybody younger still in school watching, I don't advocate this, but I drove my parents nuts because I would skip school regularly 2 or 3 times in a week. And you could find me one of 2 places. You could find me out in the woods all day, or you could find me going to the library and reading about adventures and being in the woods, which of course for parents that drove, who skips school and then goes to the city library to read? It was pretty much just Joe solo. I had a few friends that would do it with me, but I've always been a little bit of an outsider that way. That even though, I may have had friends that enjoyed the outdoors, they didn't do it the way I did it. They wouldn't commit to it the way I did.
Okay. So then when Joe does it his way and he commits, what are you doing as a teenager? You just carry in and out, being really rustic, or what, because I didn't really camp that much as a kid. So I'm just share with the listeners, how did Joe do it growing up in high school or junior high?
It was mainly how hard can I make it on myself? Again, in scouting, there's a thing called the Order of the Arrow, and you spend a night outside and they give you something like 2 matches, an egg, and an orange. And that's what you have. And I would do that to myself on purpose. I've always enjoyed facing as much adversity as I can and pursuing that. But there were times when I might go out, if I was just going out for a day, I was usually going to go out and see, can I start a fire with nothing but what I have on me? Can I source water and food? And at the time, I didn't realize what I was doing. I didn't realize that I was following basic tenets of wilderness survival. I was just out I might read about, say, Ernest Shackleton and his failed expedition to Antarctica and thinking, ooh, I wonder what it would have been like for him and his crew. And, of course, I couldn't replicate really what was happening to him in Antarctica, but I could in the winter when we lived in Northeast Pennsylvania. I could go out into the Poconos and see exactly what I could get away with. One time I was hunting and I burrowed into a snowbank and laid in the snow and even fell asleep in the snowbank. When it would snow, I would make igloos in the backyard. But it was always this, hey, let's see exactly how far I can go with this in facing adversity.
You mentioned that for high school, your folks or your family relocated to New Jersey. Is that right?
Yes.
And then I would imagine that it's a different type of environment, less access to the outdoors.
Yeah, considerably. And I would even go so far as to say that's where I started to lose myself, was in that experience.
Yeah. Can you share what you mean by you started losing yourself?
Well, I went and I can remember the first year, it was a very difficult transition for me. And when I was there, I didn't really feel that I fit in. People were friendly enough. And, the church that we went to, they were very welcoming. And I made some great friends that I still have to this day. And I would still work at summer camp. So I'd have that experience still being outside. But that was also that time frame where I discovered girls. So, I started to go in this different direction of chasing music. And in fact, that ended up being my degree in college. I had several near brushes with some well-known names to be a professional musician. And I really thought that's what I was going to chase. So it was during that time that I don't want to say jettisoned. I just was trying to fit into the culture I was in. And that didn't exist there. One of the things that I wanted to do when I first went to high school, coming from Pennsylvania, is I'd really wanted to be a search and rescue helicopter pilot. Again, the adversity of it. And my grandparents owned about 100 acres in Vermont near Killington, near the ski area there. And I even scouted out on their property where I could put a landing zone for the helicopter. And of course, I'm all of 13 or 14 at this point. And then, I go to New Jersey, the suburbs of New York City. I could see the Empire State Building from my bedroom window. So I'm that close. And I talked to the guidance counselor. He's like, what do you want to do? And I say, I want to be a search and rescue helicopter pilot for ski resorts in Vermont. And he just stared at me blankly. Like, where do you go with that in the suburbs of New Jersey? And he really had no idea how to get me there. And he's like, well, what else? And I said, well, I like music and I liked electronics. I like doing audio recording. So I started chasing that more because it's just what was available to me at that moment. Now, we can come back around to, and we probably will, when I started sort of rediscovered myself. But a large part of my adult life was in some type of performing arts and music.
Okay. So yeah, let's transition to that. So your high school counselor's like, the search and rescue, sounds interesting. I don't have any experience. I've never counseled any other kids, but this music, I've got some experience. So then he or she pushes you in that, steers you in that direction. And that's what you end up studying in college?
Yes, I did. My freshman year of college was at the Berklee School of Music in Boston. And this is going to be a theme for my early years. I went because of a girl. She went to Boston College and I knew that I could get into Berklee. So I decided to go to Berklee. I crashed and burned there and then had a year off and then ended up going to a small Christian liberal arts college in Kentucky. Back then it was Asbury College. Now it's Asbury University. And a very small, in fact, when I went, the student body was less than 1,000 students. And I knew coming from a school as established as Berklee, I was going to be big fish, small pond. And that, it's just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. Through several things there, I ended up playing professionally. And my wife and I married while we were at Asbury. She was a vocal soloist with a lot of the touring groups. I was the drummer for a lot of the touring groups. And we just hit it off well. We were married even before we were out of school. Family started. But I was able to put myself through college playing music.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And there were a lot of things that fell into line in that way. So that it started to go that direction. And then when I graduated, I had a day job offer in Manhattan.
Okay. And what type of work would that be?
Okay. This is where it's going to get to be fun because it was as the Salvation Army's camping and boys ministry director for the Northeastern United States.
Okay. So that's the fork in the road. Do you stay on music or do you go to this?
No, the fork doesn't come yet. I'm going to do that job just to become a professional musician. That's going to pay my bills until I'm established in New York City. And of course, everybody in Kentucky I was doing 2 and 3 shows a weekend. So I was playing a lot and I was doing, studio work in Cincinnati and Louisville and in Lexington. I did a few things. I didn't play in Nashville, but I did a few things for producers from Nashville. One of the things that happened, I was within a whisker's breadth of playing drums for Naomi and Winona Judd back in the day. So, everybody's like, man, you've got a day job in New York. Nobody gets that. Go, you're going to make it. And I went and it just never took off for me. So that's where that happened. And I kept chasing the music. I loved that job doing the camping ministry because it still fed that part of me. But it never occurred to me, hey, this is something that I'll do for me to really as my passion. So the fork didn't come until much later, actually.
And then, let's keep fast forwarding this. So you're chasing music and you said it didn't fully come for you. So then what are you doing leading up to getting closer to, starting your own company, Valiant Outfitters?
So left New York. My wife's family was in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And we ended up there. I ended up on staff as one of the music and worship pastors at a large church there. And still having these, what I jokingly refer to as near-death experiences with fame, where opportunities would come along and then it would never fully produce the fruit. And, that's when I really wasn't doing anything outdoors at all. We might need to edit this part. With the storms coming in, one of the things that I do here is I work with the amateur radio emergency services. And with the storms coming in, all the people who normally get weather reports from me with the big storms, they're all asking if they're safe. So let me turn that off.
Okay.
So let's see, transitioning. So I'm on staff at the church in Virginia Beach. Through several things there, we have to make a move to Florida to maintain my career of doing church music and that type of thing. Here comes the pivot point, is my dad had done a wilderness camp for at-risk teens for decades. 3 or 4 weeks in the summer as part of the Salvation Army's camping program for at-risk youth.
Is that similar to the outdoor camps that people do in the
Outward
Rocky?
Bound?
Yeah, Outward Bound. Yeah.
Very similar.
Okay.
Very similar idea.
Okay.
And I realized that I was only going to have so many more opportunities to do that with him again. He just was not going to be able to keep going. He's into his 70s at this point. And I called him and I said, "Hey, Dad, how about if I come up and do another wilderness camp with you?" And of course, he loved that idea. So I went up to do the wilderness camp with him. And that first night before the campers arrived, we were all in our tents. The staff was there and we're ready. And so it's a super quiet night. And all of a sudden I went, "Oh, this is who I am." So that's that wrapping back around of when I went to New Jersey and I lost myself. It was in this moment that I went, "Oh, wait, this is where I belong." So that's the pivot point back to it. Then Valiant kind of grew out of that through several, I was able to do that with my dad for 2 years. And then his assistant, who is an old family friend. In fact, I joke that Darren is his name. Darren is the son my dad always wanted. Now, and my dad loves me. I'm not casting shade on my dad. It's just we've always joked that Darren was the one who did wilderness camp with him all those years when my brother and I weren't around. Dad was coming up on his 75th birthday and their 50th wedding anniversary. And we knew that Dad couldn't keep going much longer. And Darren and I said to him, "Let's make 75 years old your last year of wilderness camp. We'll have all the alumni back. We'll do a huge blowout." And he just wasn't having it. He didn't want to talk about it. The first night we're setting up for camp, and this is out in the woods of Maine, so it's pretty austere conditions. And my dad, we're not sure what type of episode he had. We're not sure if he had a stroke and then fell or fell and had a stroke. But either way, my job was to hang the tarps for the dining area. And I was, putting up, and I was trying a new knot that I had, seen somebody do. And I wasn't using Dad's traditional knots. And of course, Dad, the old grizzled wilderness guy, he walks up behind me and I even start to tense up. I'm in my 50s and I'm still going, "Oh, what's Dad going to say?" And he walked, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying this new knot." I should have known something wasn't quite right when he didn't correct me. And he walked away and he didn't get 3 or 4 steps. And I heard a thud on the ground and he was thrashing around. And I turned back and I ran over to him. I called Darren up from what Darren was doing. And my dad was in the fetal position on his back with blood pooling in his eye and wheezing breath. And there were several times he stopped breathing and Darren and I looked at each other like, we've just lost the old man. We didn't, but that was Dad's last year. And that's when I picked up the mantle of the wilderness camps with Darren. Then it was out of all of that I was putting together men's retreats based on the wilderness skills and life lessons I was teaching to at-risk youth, that I showed it to my wife and she said, "This would be great for families to do." And that's where Valiant germinated. Yeah, Valiant is about outside, but the hidden agenda is getting people to experience their best life.
Got it. So I want to rewind just a little bit. So you're with your dad in that camp the night before the guests come, and you had this epiphany that, "Oh, this is where I'm supposed to be." So when people get that epiphany, they usually start thinking, they can't stop thinking about it, or, they have a bevy of different emotions. What it transpired for you when you had that realization, or was it just like in and out and you're like, "Okay, I'm just going to change on a dime"? Or did it get planted and you really started thinking about that more intentionally?
And the reason I think I'm stumped is I didn't have to think about it intentionally. It's who I was. Now, I will say who it did shock was my wife, who, she's a performer herself, and we had performed together for decades by this point. And we did music. Everybody knew us as music. And then all of a sudden her husband comes back from 3 weeks in the woods saying, hey, I found myself. And she knew about this other part of me because, of course, I'd worked for the Salvation Army in camping. I'd still, gone hunting occasionally, would still go fishing occasionally, would spend a little bit of time in the woods. But for me, it was just like, oh, I can take a breath. I've been breathing shallow for decades. I haven't known me all this time. The idea of turning it into a business didn't happen for a few more years. At that point, it was just like, oh, I'm going to get back outside more often.
So then you decide after your dad has his episode, you decide that I'm just going to jump in and make this transition and take over the company and rebrand it? Or did you just say, I'm going to start something different? Or was the company always called Valiant Outfitters?
Well, the Valiant Outfitters comes from the birth of my first granddaughter.
Okay, congratulations.
Her name is Lucy. She's 7 now, and it's not short for Lucille or anything. Her name is Lucy. She's named after Lucy Pevensey from C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia. And when she would be in Narnia, her name was Queen Lucy the Valiant. So that's where the Valiant came from. The Outfitters came from the idea germinating, hey, learning wilderness skills, learning bushcrafting skills, learning survival skills is a great way to equip yourself for adversity in life. So we can kind of go back to the whole reason I got into it or enjoyed it so much as a kid was that facing adversity and overcoming adversity. So that's where the idea for Valiant came. But Dad's wilderness camp, he ran it, but it wasn't his. It was under the auspices of the Salvation Army. So it was just a natural transition for them. And of course, they're also going, hey, we're getting the guy who used to be the main resource for all 13 of our camps to do just this one little part. Yeah, we'll take that. So Darren and I did that for another 4 or 5 years, but I started to pivot away from what Dad had done because Dad's idea was, hey, just get out in the woods. I went a bit more directed and used it as more as an educational opportunities for these at-risk teens, where they would learn very specific survival skills and they would go through a program over a week that then eventually became the survival program of Valiant.
I see. And then you mentioned that you had a big break, like a popular TV survival instructor had reached out to you and then there's some mentorship. So how does that get laced into this story?
Yeah, his name is Creek Stewart, and I blame Valiant on him. I had been a follower of his for 2 or 3 years, and he was doing a competition about an hour and a half north of my house, a survival competition. And technically it was supposed to be for beginners, but I was able to sneak in. Ironically, even though I wasn't a beginner and they recognized pretty early on, oh wait, this guy's sandbagging us, I still didn't take first place. I took second place. So I'm not sure what that says about my survival skills. But anyway, Creek and I met there, and some of his staff and some of the instructors. One of his instructors had been on Naked and Afraid, and another one of his instructors had done some other survival reality TV things. Well, and Creek and I sort of hit it off. In fact, I realized that we were hitting it off when we were sitting around the campfire one night. And as you do around the campfire, you try to, outtell each other's stories. And Creek and I are the last two standing, still telling stories. And I thought to myself, I'm going toe to toe with Creek Stewart in campfire stories. This is okay. I can live with this. So we kept in touch. Then he reached out to me during COVID, and he knew of my love for ham radio and that I taught ham radio courses, just as something on an aside. And he reached out to me and said, hey, I'm having to pivot from in-person courses to online courses because of COVID. He said, if you can create some content for me, I know you really want to start your own thing. I can do some coaching with you. And he even had a course for how to start your own outdoor company, guiding company, and how to do it online. So that's kind of where that meshed. He was the one who kind of said, hey, I'll support you in this. And he's been fantastic. It's been very one-sided in that he said, listen, I'll use the full cash of my following, my social media presence to help promote your company. And he has, and he's asked for nothing in return. So that's how that worked with Creek. And we have kept a relationship and even become friends since then. And the latest thing, I don't know if I mentioned this, we're talking earlier, has led to the publishing of my first book for Simon & Schuster. I joke that it's not the book I wanted to write, but it's the book I get to write. And if you've ever tried publishing a book and you don't have to write any query letters and you get in with an acquisitions editor, I took it. I was like, yes, please. So Creek has been instrumental in not only that mentoring, but also helping me network in that way.
Awesome. Well, first, congratulations, Joe, on getting published with such a renowned publishing house. My follow-up question is, what is the title or what's the nature of that book? And what's the ensuing book that you actually want to write?
Well, the ensuing book I actually was working on already, called The Valiant Way. And it's specifically about the benefits and the research of what time in the wilderness can do for us cognitively and the benefits of that, especially as we age. One of the things that they found to maintain neuroplasticity, spend as much time as you can navigating unfamiliar terrain. The millions of calculations your brain has to make to do that maintains neuroplasticity. They're finding that all these apps and things for neuroplasticity aren't nearly as effective as that. And then also just the emotional benefits of time outside. I used to joke it's impossible to be in the woods and in a bad mood at the same time. Who knew? There's research that proves it. And I won't go into detail on it because I get to be a bit pedantic with it, but look up the 90-second rule about what happens when we experience a negative emotional stimuli, that we're essentially over it within 90 seconds. The chemicals have flushed from our body. The reason we stay triggered is we keep re-triggering ourselves. Well, take a look at anything that is made by humans. It's almost exclusively repeating patterns, straight lines that are parallel and perpendicular. So if I have a negative stimuli while I'm inside, those repeating patterns are going to repeat the trigger. This, again, is why nobody has ever said in history, I'm stepping inside to calm down. I'm stepping outside to calm down, because there are no repeating patterns, nothing predictable, no straight lines in nature. Then along in that book, I was going along, not just, okay, here's all the science and the research and the benefits, but here are skills you can practice outside. Here's how to go backpacking. Here's how to light a fire with a bow drill. Here's how to do those things. So that's the book I wanted to write. The book I got to write with Creek is actually a follow-on to his Disaster Survival 101 book. It's called Emergency Communication 101. So there we have my love of ham radio, and I've deployed for 7 or 8 hurricanes now to provide communication after a hurricane. In fact, one of them was I was in Puerto Rico just days after Maria devastated the island. And the reason I was chosen for that team of 50 was because of my survival skills.
And Jared, just share with the audience in simplistic terms, what is ham radio? I know that this is for the 40 and plus audience at UnLost Cause, but there may be some youngins listening. So can you share in simplistic terms, what is ham radio?
Well, my flippant answer is it's the original social media. But really what it is, if you're familiar with CB radio, it's CB radio or the little walkie-talkies you may have played with as a kid on steroids, with a very modest radio that generates less power than most light bulbs. I can talk around the world with just throwing a wire up into a tree. And in fact, when I first called my dad to come back up to wilderness camp, he's like, well, I already have all my spots for trainers filled. What would you teach? And I said, I'll come up and teach ham radio. So I did that, set that up out in the wilderness. So that's what ham radio is in a nutshell. It's just playing with walkie-talkies, but we get to do it with big boy toys and talk around the world.
You get this break that you characterize by partnering with Creek. And so was he instrumental in terms of you set the vision for what Valiant Outfitters becomes, or how did your vision may have been changed or influenced by your relationship with him?
It was mainly help in getting the online presence going, not social media, but learning how to, well, in fact, he said to those of us that he was coaching, he said, you may think that you're wilderness instructors, you're now email address gatherers. And he said, anything you're working on that doesn't get you an email address is a waste of your time. So he really helped us because he's a chronic entrepreneur, and it was really that aspect of it. And, a humble brag, I didn't really need help in learning how to do wilderness instruction. I needed help in learning how to make money at it. And that's really what it did. So it was a lot of the logistics of it. And he walked us through the process of, building your website out, legally things you had to do with your website, your disclaimers and all of that type of thing. So it was very much the logistics that he did, but the huge benefit was just to have his name attached to what I was doing. And in fact, I used to do, as part of Valiant, a YouTube series that we called 5 to Survive. And he did a full hour interview with me on that. And it helped so much in launching. Now, I will say the course that I did for him on his site, to my knowledge, it is still the largest grossing and volume course he's had on his site. And I recognize it has nothing to do with me. Number one, it was coming out during COVID and also during the summer with all of the riots, and it had Creek's name attached to it. So that's really the benefit for him logistically, and then him lending his cachet to what I was trying to do.
Yeah, well, it seems very symbiotic, which is great because I think everyone knows how hard it is to try to turn a lost cause into an unlost cause. And a lot of it is, it just takes a village. And it sounds like you found people, well, at least this would be a huge tent pole to support you in that process. And another question is, I've watched Bear Grylls and I've watched Naked and Afraid XL and all that. Did those popularize this whole wilderness survival and become a huge tailwind for you all? Or were they in a way like taught the wrong things and then you didn't like it because you had to unteach them and say, well, no, that's just TV. This is the real way you have to survive?
Yes and yes. There was a bit of that. Bear is the real deal.
Oh, he is.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Bear is. Yeah. Now, and Bear doesn't like some of the things he has to do. I haven't met Bear, but I'm only 1 degree of separation from him. And in fact, there was a thing that he did on one of his shows with the celebrities where they had to go from one boulder to another boulder. And even though the separation was only maybe 3 or 4 feet, they kind of hopped over it. All of us real survival instructors are going, because even a twisted ankle is death out there. Well, I learned later on that he didn't even like that the producers made him put that in there. So there's a certain amount of that. I've never really watched Naked and Afraid. The first one I watched was Les Stroud of Survivor Man. And what I loved about Les is he would go out and do survival, but do all of his own video as well. He didn't even have a video crew with him. So my son is a video producer, so I know some of what goes on. So that just always amazed me. It's kind of like people said, you could tell Ginger Rogers was a better dancer than Fred Astaire because she did all the same moves backwards and in heels. It was that same way for me with Les. There's also a bit of a running joke in the survival space that, everybody wants the big sexy thing. They want to know, they want to see how big your knife is and they want to see your fire kit and things like that. And survival instruction, and we all do this, our most basic fire making tool is a Bic lighter. People will come into camp and they'll be like, hey, we want to see your fire kit. And the first thing you pull out is a Bic lighter. They're like, wait, I thought you were a survivalist. And I'm like, no, I'm a survivor. And if I'm under duress and I'm freezing cold, I'm not fighting with a bow drill to start a fire. I'm whipping out that Bic lighter. Now I can do a bow drill. I can do flint and steel. I can do all of those things. And I teach all of those skills because a Bic lighter can fail. Or the other one is we all have these really big bush knives, and everybody wants to see the big bushcraft knife. And we'll joke with ourselves about this. I have that on when everybody's coming into camp. And then the second, once everybody's into camp and they've been impressed by it, I take it off and I have a little 4-inch blade that I use for most of the work. So that's why I say the yes and yes to that. There's a certain amount of, I'm going to have to unteach this. Another thing that everybody wants to learn how to harvest food. They all want to know how to trap animals, get food. Well, the average search and rescue situation is over in 3 days. And there's a survival rule of threes. The average person can survive for 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. Chances are you're never going to need to harvest food in a survival situation. It's going to be over by then. You're either going to be rescued or it's going to be a really bad day. So when people are asking me, what do I do about food? I open up my backpack and I show them that I have a bunch of Nutri-Grain bars. So that's the reality of the survivor thing that they don't show you on TV. But all the guys who do it on TV also recognize that. They're doing it for the producers.
Out of just curiosity, Joe, the survival habits and best practices that you teach, is that endemic to the Northeast? Because I would imagine the flora, fauna, topography, climate, it's all different. And, South America or Australia, you have all these things that can kill you. There's a super poisonous. So I'm just curious, do you do it very specific to that region or do you do more general survival or a combination?
A combination, heavy towards general, because really that survival for 3 days is very generalized. If you understand the principles of it, the one thing that can be differentiated is the shelter. In the Northeast, my shelter is mainly going to be designed to keep warm. In Florida, it's going to be designed to keep cool, but it's still shelter. So it is location specific. And that was a bit of a learning curve for me starting in Florida, because I didn't grow up doing wilderness survival and wilderness skills in Florida, and I joke, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, except in Florida, everything will kill you here.
Yeah, exactly. So then Valiant Outfitters, you said that a distinction is you're doing all the outdoor stuff, but it's about being outdoors to live your best life and to learn. And it sounds like there's a whole person aspect to it. So can you share, now that we know a little bit more, even more about, what the mission and the goal of the organization is? That mission is, are you familiar with the Japanese concept of the misogi? I am not. It's where you test yourself to beyond your limits. You testify. Now, those can go on for 3 weeks to 3 months. We don't do that level. But the survival training part of it and the bushcrafting part of Valiant is, number one, to unplug. Just get some time away from your phone and other devices. And I'm not against those things. They're wonderful tools. But the research, you can look anywhere for the research on how we need to unplug more. Already what I mentioned about that we were made for chaos. I come from a very strong Christian tradition, and I do a lot of work for churches. And one of the things I like to say to them is, we weren't, if you're a creationist, we weren't created in the high rise of Eden. We were created in the Garden of Eden. If you ascribe to evolution, we didn't evolve in condominiums. We evolved in the wilderness. There are certain positive gene expressions that only happen when we face adversity and extreme cold or extreme heat. Outdoors is where you're going to experience that. And it's going to be that random and that chaos. We evolved, or we were created for that chaos. And it's more about people discovering exactly how resilient they are. Along with that, we also do corporate leadership and team building training. And as I said, we'll even do family training where a family will, go through it. And when you're under duress, the communication skills you can develop and exercise are invaluable. So that's the hidden agenda behind what we do at Valiant. As I said, we say we're an outdoor company, and we're really a best life company. That's the tool we use to accomplish it. And then share with the audience, what is, I don't know if there's a typical tour or the most popular package that people sign up for. And what is it, like a week and you have a 50-pound pack, or is it 3 days and you have a 25-pound pack? Share some color on it. Well, we actually, as I said, we have 2 tracks. We have the survival track, and we also have a backpacking track. I'll address the backpacking track because that's our most popular. In fact, we have 2 areas of emphasis with our backpacking. One is over 50, getting people that are over 50 out and backpacking. Our most popular for them is a one-nighter. It's not our most popular yet, but I suspect it will be our most popular, and I'm going to try to get the title right. I didn't come up with the title, my quasi-marketing team did. It's I've never done this before, but I want to try it at least once, and I probably won't try it again, overnight backpacking trip. And it's specifically for people who are intimidated about putting up a sheet in the living room and camping out there. It's a simple one-nighter. We're never more than 1.5 miles away from our cars. So something goes really south, and it's just to get people out. I suspect that one's going to be very popular. Our most popular now is actually a ladies only hike. And these are group hikes that, just strangers will sign up for. And I wasn't even pursuing that, but one of the things I learned is guys won't do a guided backpacking trip. They don't like asking for directions. So they're not about that. If a guy is going to do a backpacking trip with us, it's a private one that his wife wanted him to do. Ladies are all about it. I'm a 61-year-old guy. I can't lead. I can lead a ladies only backpacking trip, but it's going to be pretty awkward. I'm blessed to have an amazing associate guide who landed at Valiant out of the blue. She just emailed me one day, had been through a pretty rough divorce and lost both of her parents in a very short time span, and really found solace backpacking. And she said, I love what you're doing at Valiant. She didn't even know she was writing to me. She wrote to info@valiantoutfitters.com and shared this thing and said, do you have a place for me to help women learn the joy of backpacking? That's
our moneymaker. That's the most popular one. And that's usually just a 1 or a 2-nighter. Very low impact, not doing more than 12 or 15 miles backpacking over that 1 or 2 days, carrying a pack that we try to make sure that the pack is never more than 20% of the body weight of the person carrying it. So most of them, that's going to be around that 20-pound mark. On the survival side, big one is, guys wanting to come in and just test their mettle. Be Bear Grylls. That's what they want to do.
Oh man, I'm sure there's a bunch of fun social media with guys being guys and testing their mettle on the survival side and hopefully not cutting off a finger or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and what that might look like is we teach, as I explained a little while ago, the survival rule of threes, and the breathing part is easy. Then they'll learn how to tie knots, construct a shelter. They'll learn how to start a fire, and they'll learn bow drill. They'll learn ferro rod. They'll learn, flint and steel, all of those things. We very rarely get to harvesting food, except for, all right, identify these berries if you need to. And
Go
then
eat some insects.
Yeah, there was an opportunity a while ago during COVID that, again, this goes back to Creek. The producers of The Bachelor had contacted him, and one of the things they wanted to happen was that the women were going to have to eat insects as part of the show. He couldn't do it, so he called me and he said, "Hey, could you go do it?" That season was canceled because of COVID. But yeah, eat insects. And I'll let you in on another one of the secrets that we do. When it comes to eating insects, all we do is we buy bait crickets. And that's so we're not making people gather their insects out there. That's some pretty high level survival stuff.
I like it. And then when you're doing these ladies backpacking tours, do you also have curated questions, or are you just letting them be solace in nature, or do the guides actually have a series of questions they use to really spark more introspection or group dynamics discussion?
They'll bring up these points. Emma is my ladies associate guide, and she will just engage them in the conversation centered around what is going to be the book I hope to have called The Valiant Way. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Emma when she first came on, was she kept saying to me, "Joe, I want to do it the Joe way." Because I go, "Emma, you've got the skills. She came prepackaged." And she said, "No, I want to make sure I'm doing it the Joe way. And I'm a bit phobic about it being about me." So that's when I turned it into, no, it's not the Joe way, it's the Valiant way. And so she'll teach very specific skills. She didn't have any survival skills when she came, but she's like a sponge. So she's picked those up. And when you're sitting around the campfire at night, that's really when the action happens. You're just sitting there, and if you've ever sat around a natural campfire at night, you understand, you just find yourself mesmerized by this fire, and you'll discuss things that you might not have discussed at any other time. Number one, you're emotionally and physically exhausted, so your guard comes down a bit. And that's why, even though logistically I could lead a ladies backpacking trip, it wouldn't work as well as it does with Emma. Now, what a lot of them don't know is I'm usually less than half a mile away, just to make sure that everything is going on. And I implicitly trust Emma, but I also want them to always have that backup just in case.
Of course. And then Joe, as you turn your lost cause into unlost cause, and by pursuing this dream and bring it to reality, how has that changed your perception of yourself?
Imposter syndrome is a real thing. It's strong. I regularly am like, what am I doing? I'm constantly worried, am I really bringing anything of value to people? And it goes back to that kind of where, my small business advisor said, you should do guided backpacking trips. And I was like, you walk in the woods. What is there to know? This really came out in writing the book with Creek, because I was drawing on things that I've been teaching for 10 or 15 years. And I would write a sentence or I'd write a section and I'd go, how do I know that's true? Where did I learn that? Am I just making it up? Now, the blessing is when I went back and researched myself, and nobody fact checks themselves more than an author. I just kept going back and I'd research and I'd go, wow, is that really true? And you go through these peaks and valleys of, oh, I do know what I'm doing. And then do I really? So that's one of the things that I learned about myself. Ironically, one of the things I learned about myself is what I'm capable of that I didn't realize I was capable of, which is the whole point of why I started Valiant. So, it's kind of like physician heal thyself, realizing, oh, wait, I can do this. And I'll go back to the book again. That is without a doubt the single most intellectually and cognitive difficult thing I've ever done in my life, especially when, you write the first half, you submit the first half, and then your publisher writes back to you and says, hey, this is all great stuff, but you got to change it all. It's like, you're too much detail. We don't want this to, and you're going, wait, what? And, they're saying, and you have to cut out like half the words. And, I would say to students, listen, when you're in school, writing a 500-word paper is the hard thing. Getting up to 500 words. When you're an adult, getting it down to 500 words is the hard thing. But through the whole process, I just kept saying to myself, I can thread this needle. I can do this. But it did teach me what I was capable of doing. For the business aspect, the hardest thing has been me being the brand. That's a really hard thing that I didn't expect. And my small business advisor, and I must say, our county is who provided my small business advisor because they want to turn our county into an outdoor experience.
And Joe, just to clarify for the listeners, when you say small business advisor, is this an actual advisor associate, the SBA, like the government body, or is it just an advisor who just advises small businesses?
No, with the SBA. And yeah, in fact, he's a retired vice president of one of the big cell companies. I forget which one. And he was fantastic. And what was great about the relationship with him was he was clueless about outdoors. But his brother is a park ranger out in the West. So I would share things with him. He'd bounce it off of his, brother. But he constantly had to say to me, Joe, you're the premium. If people want to go on a backpacking trip or do a survival thing with Valiant, that's okay. But if they want to do it with you, they have to pay a premium for it. And of course, I'm going, no, I just want to teach. If I could make Valiant exactly what I want, somebody else would do all the marketing. They do all the bookkeeping. They do all of those things and just say, hey, Joe, here's what's on your calendar. Go teach. And that's one of the hardest things of making this dream a reality is having to write with my non-dominant hand so much. And in fact, the vast majority of my time is business stuff. Very little of it is actually getting to live the dream.
Yeah. So what, if I can tease that a little bit is that, you love being in the outdoors. You had this love as a kid and now you're coming back to it, but you're running a successful business. So you're working on your business versus being in the business and being the bottleneck. But then therein lies the rub because you're not being in nature as much. But you do have greater impact because you can put more people through the system because you actually have a business now.
Right. And it's funny, I'm even a bit uncomfortable with like saying that, Valiant is successful. We're still very much in the process of getting there. This won't be successful until I'm convinced I could disappear and it still happen. That's ultimately my goal. In fact, writing the book, one of the things that I'm learning is true, and I knew it was true, but I'm learning the reality of it is it looks like it's going to take us 5 years to be an overnight success. When this book comes out, that's going to change everything for us. So now I'm running as fast as I can to get ahead of the wave cresting.
Which is a good first world problem to have, is hopefully a surge in demand, right? So I want to go back a little bit. And when you and I were prepping for this, you talked about one of the biggest fears or challenges is it's easier to be in like the backup singer, the backup quarterback, than the starting one. And I think that also ties into what you're very candid about imposter syndrome and how it's a real thing. So it sounds like you acknowledge it, it's still there, and you're working through it. But maybe you can share with the audience, because I know so many people struggle with this. And when I started with UnLost Cause, and even today, I'm like, hey, is this good enough? What do other people think? And I sometimes get in my own head. So share with the UnLost Cause community how you think about it and how you've been able to process that.
If you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, I'm an INTJ. In spite of all appearances, I'm a huge introvert. My wife, who's an extrovert, likes to say I'm a high-functioning introvert, but I'm an introvert. So now picture me not only having to meet all these brand new people, then take them into a place where they're very uncomfortable and in very austere conditions. That has been a huge transition for me. And the way I've done it, and we have a phrase that we use. We even have a t-shirt, shameless plug division. We have on the front, it says the Valiant Way. And on the back, it has what has become our unofficial motto, dance with the fear you've been running from. And the idea is don't just face your fear, turn around and make it your dance partner. It's sort of a jujitsu thing. Take your enemy's strength and turn it to your advantage. take that fear, which was your enemy, and say, hey, not am I not only afraid of you anymore, I'm going to dance with you. It's very similar to hug the cactus, lean into the adversity. That's what, has really helped me in those things. Like that, going back to why I brought up being an introvert. That's a huge deal for an introvert. When I finish guiding a backpacking trip, I always add one more night on just for myself because I have been on literally for 24 hours. And that's why I'm so conscious of my emotional health, my mental health, my physical health, because I need to be on that whole time that I'm out there with that group. Now, the good thing is we're outside, so I've got that going for me that they're not going to be, wallowing in, their self-pity. But that's one of the things. And I think that in large part also goes to me being the brand, and having to be the face of this and not having a backstop, not having somebody that I can fall back on, but I'll circle back around to a guy like Creek or another Jason Hunt, who has a great survival and bushcraft operation in Kentucky, that I know that if I need to, I can go to them and say, hey, what's the deal here? And I would even say, make sure that you have people that know how to ask when you're having a bad day or when you want to quit, when you want to give it up, that there's somebody that when you go to them, they know how to say, how do you want me to show up for you? How do you want me to show up in this conversation? Do you want me to give you logic and reason? Or are you going to be okay just throwing up all over my shoes?
One of my favorites, and I learned this from the New York Times, very similar, is basically, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged? Right? And then let them call the pitch. And otherwise, if I choose the wrong one, it can come off insensitive or not what they're looking for in that moment. So, Joe, I was thinking when I was prepping for this, like being out in the wilderness, that's a recharge mechanism for a lot of people. So I was thinking introvert. But then when I started talking to you, I'm like, oh, wow, he's great. Just vibing. He's a extrovert. And now, so when your wife says, or you said it's a high functioning extrovert, I'm like, oh, okay. But then when you said you tacked an extra day on, it does feel like, you depleted your batteries and you need some me time, and the ideal place for you to get that me time and that recharge is nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to the dance with the fear you've been running from, what I've done is I've just kind of gone back to why I did this as a kid. I just view that as one more level of adversity. And, it's funny to look at the books that I read, because I do read a lot of outdoor books. I do read a lot of bushcrafting books and things like that. But really the books that I've leaned on the most are like Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, or his other one, Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be, which is basically just sit down and do it. Still Procrastinating. Two others that they synthesize these two ideas is, and I forget the authors, forgive me, but Death by Comfort and The Comfort Crisis. And they've just really helped me settle down in that way and say, all right, this is one more level of adversity, this me having to learn to engage people, which of course I don't miss the irony of also having been a pastor at a church and being an introvert. I was like, okay, how does that work? And even being a performer, my life as a musician, though I will say that my experience is most stage performers, music or acting, are introverts. The reason that we can function that way is we're in control of the environment. It's when you stick me at a small dinner party with 8 people, I panic.
Got it. So when you've had some time to be in nature and recharge and reflect, are you proud of what you've done?
I will be proud.
Will be. What about today?
I'm in that process. There are things I've done that I look back on with joy. Joy is a big thing for me. I look back on with peace. I'm not sure that being proud of it is in my vocabulary. Maybe it should be.
What strikes me is when I'm listening, I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. That's so much to be proud of. But when you say will be, it has this tinge of conditionality. I will love this if this happens, or I will be happy when I get this, or, I will be proud if this. And I'm just wondering, is there some conditionality, or does it hinge on something?
I'm not sure that I'll ever be able to know. And I'm going to go back to, the time I spent teaching, a degree in education and being a pastor. It's hard to judge how well you've helped somebody build their life. Does that make sense? As you were talking, saying, in the midst of writing the book, I was not proud of it. I did not like it at all. once we submitted the manuscript and I looked, I said, no, I think it's good. I think I'm proud of it. So maybe it is. But one of the things I like doing things with my hands. I like building things, and I like doing that because when you're helping people live their best life, I will probably be gone from the earth and not get to see the fruit. Now, again, coming from a Christian tradition, I will, and I look forward to that day. There's this scripture verse, that says, when, God says, well done, good and faithful servant. Really what I want to hear is well played, dog, well played. And when I would work with the kids at Wilderness Camp, and in the Salvation Army, it was a Christian camp. Unabashedly, we would teach Christian values. And as a pastor working with youth at church, whenever we'd finish a big retreat or one of these camps, I would gather them all around and I'd say to them, we will never be in this place with this group of people ever again on earth. But we're told that there are 4 walls to heaven and there are 3 gates on each wall. Said, when we all get there, let's all meet at the middle gate on the eastern wall. That's when I'll get to be proud, when I'll be able to look back over their lives with them and see, what they've done, not in careers and not in, what a lot of people think of as success, but what did they do to impact other lives, to pay it forward? I would tell, when I was teaching technology right before I started Valiant, I tried to drill into my kids so much, I'd say, I don't care how smart you are. I'd say, because hard work always trumps smart. I know a lot. I was one of them in school. I was super smart. I was in all gifted classes. I just didn't show up for class.
You're out in the nature, right?
Yeah. So it's like, so I happen to know hard work always trumps being smart because hard work always leads to being smart. There's no way for me to measure that in the lives I've poured into. So yeah, I guess I am proud of some things I've set my hand to, but to me, that's a thin, shallow pride. I'll still rejoice in it. I'll still, grab a hold of it, but I'll be proud knowing that I've helped people live their best life.
For the listeners who may have, this passion, but they're starting to think they're losing the grip on it and thinking this is going to be a lost cause. I'm not going to have the gumption or the energy to try to lean into it to make it a lost cause. What words of wisdom or message would you share with them?
First, I would say it's trite, but at least try, at least give it a shot. And then don't be tied to what you think it should look like. Valiant is not looking at all like what I first wanted it to be. There are bits and pieces of it, but when I started, I had no intention of guiding backpacking trips. I just wanted to do survival. I definitely had no idea that we'd be doing ladies only hikes. I was like, what is that? So, and this goes to like the survival training again. I very often will try to tell people, and also the work I do with emergency communication after disasters, is if you go into anything with a plan, you're not going to make good decisions. And it's a lot of fun because, people always cock their head like, wait, I've always heard, fail to plan is planning to fail. And I go, no, you have to go into it with plans. Because if you go into it with one plan, you're going to be emotionally tied to that plan. And you're not going to be able to jettison it or change it. And the blessing for me is that's part of being an INTJ. We INTJs, we hold really fast to our ideas and our concepts and our ideas or philosophies. But if a better one comes along, we have no problem jettisoning that old thought. And I know that a lot of personality types aren't like that. If that's where you are, recognize that about yourself. I would say definitely do a Myers-Briggs or an Enneagram and learn about yourself, but don't use it as an excuse to, well, I'm an introvert and I'll just never be an extrovert. It's like, no, if you're going to start your own business, you've got to learn to be an extrovert. It just lets you know, okay, these are my blind spots. This is where I'm going to do my work. This is where I'm going to bring people onto my team that can supplement me, that can fill those holes for me. So I would encourage them to do those things, but also not hold too closely to the, here's the way to put it. Don't hold too closely to the specifics of the dream. Hold to the concept of the dream. And I would even say it's probably going to be bigger and better than you imagined. I'll give another survival example of this. When we're teaching survival and we teach, okay, you have those 3 days that you need to survive, and you're in the very beginning of the survival situation. What do I need to do to be surviving in 3 days? Okay, that's too big. What do I need to be doing in 3 hours to survive in 3 days? Still too big. What do I need to do in the next 3 minutes to be in the next 3 hours, to be in the next 3 days. And I would say that starting your own business, chasing your own dream and passion is very much the same. All right, I know what I want it to look like in 10 years, but what does it need to look like in 5 years? What does it need to look like next year? That's why I tend to calendar 12 to 18 months out, because what comes after, that's just too big of a chunk when I'm the one chasing the passion. Once Valiant Outfitters, we're employing, 50 guides and I have a full marketing team and all, that's when we can worry about 10 years out there. But for now, don't hold too closely to the specifics of your dream.
I love it. I jotted down these notes around that for people who haven't pursued it. You said just get started. Don't hold too close. Pivot. Like you never thought you'd be doing a ladies only backpacking tour. Do a personality test. Understand what your blind spots are. And you can always supplement those blind spots, but you got to acknowledge and be honest about what they are. And then lastly, I love that example of 3 days survival. It's just too overwhelming. 3 hours might be too overwhelming, but hey, what can I do in the next 3 minutes? What's the smallest, every journey starts with that first step. What's that smallest step that one can do to lean into, their lost cause, to turn it into a lost cause?
Right. I think that Special Forces has a term for it. I forget the exact term, but it's basically defining your horizon. And depending on where you are, your horizon is going to be a different distance from where you are. Just get to that next horizon, what you can see, and then take another look out. And that horizon is going to change with how much duress you're under. On a day that you're just completely overwhelmed, hey, listen, what can I do in the next 3 minutes? The nice thing about that is, but then you also start to get your dopamine hits. You have that short horizon, you hit that 3-minute goal, and it's like, oh, I feel pretty good about myself. Here we go. I'll let you have this one. 3 minutes. Hey, I'm pretty proud of what I did the last 3 minutes.
So then, Joe, on the flip side, if you were laying on your deathbed and you didn't lean into this, turning your lost cause into a very successful unlost cause, how do you think you'd feel?
I want to give an honest answer. That's why I'm pausing and thinking. I would still feel pretty good. I would mourn the lost cause. And I think that's something that we need to learn to do in general, especially in Western culture. We don't do a very good job of mourning and celebrating, of hey, I'm sorry I lost this thing, but boy, while it was going on, it was a blast. My self-worth comes from who I am. Honestly, if you're next to me on a plane and you ask, what do you do? I adore my wife. I admire my children. I spoil my grandchildren. If I'm on my deathbed and I've been successful in those things, the dream, I'm okay. Would I prefer it happen? And then maybe to a point, the success of it is, okay, if this doesn't work, am I going to be disappointed? Have I lost money on it? Yeah. Have I, spun my wheels? I don't think so. Have I wasted time? I don't think so. It's part of, and of course, this comes back to the backpacking thing. Hoping people understand that the view of a mountain from the valley is awe-inspiring. The view of the valley from the summit is sublime. You can't have one without the other. I'll very often say to people, like my wife, she's not into what I do at all. My wife's idea of camping is a dirty room at a hotel with a name, with a color or a number in it. And sometimes it's a mystery to her. And I'll say, if I could just take you to the top of a mountain and let you see what I see. And then I realize, no, that would rob her of the joy of knowing that she got herself there. If I could transport somebody to the top of a mountain and have them look the view, they would like it, but it still would not be that same experience. And one of the things that we have in backpacking guiding, and this comes from more serious mountaineering, the guys who might do, Everest or K2 and guide, my job is not to get you to the end of the hike. My job is to get you home safely. So there have been times when I've had to say to groups, hey, we're not going to make it. We need to turn and go back. We call those successful failures. I've never had anybody complain after making it back saying, wow, I really miss, or I'm really disappointed I didn't get to the top. I'm disappointed, but wow, this still was an amazing experience. So I think that can be kind of like a microcosm of me. If I get there and I'm on the deathbed, David, gosh darn it, the things I've gotten to do, even if the dream doesn't happen, I don't think that's going to be an issue, even if it doesn't happen.
Joe, that's a wonderful answer. Very philosophical. And I admire how you took a pause before you dove into it versus, the common responses. And I really appreciate how thoughtful that was. And then since we're a community together at UnLost Cause, what ask would you have of our community?
Go to the website, sign up for an over 50 hike. I mean, and of course, I say that somewhat, facetiously, but also experience it. If you can't make it to us, there are guides all across the country that will do the backpacking trip. In fact, we call them bucket list adventures, for people to say, hey, I want to do this. This is something I've always wanted to do. And here's my chance. I'm an empty nester now. I've got the time to do it. I love getting to take older couples out. That's a lot of fun, so get to experience that. Just check out our social media presence on Instagram. That's where we're most active. And that's much more philosophical. You go to our Instagram page, that's more, kind of like the inspirational posters they used to put up in school, but like kind of with the outdoor Valiant twist on it.
And then Joe, for people who are interested in supporting, following, or connecting with Valiant Outfitters, please, what are the exact handles for on Instagram or X or Twitter or the website?
Since we're a community, the Valiant one is just Valiant Outfitters for both Instagram and Facebook. But I'd really push towards the Instagram. I'm going to share my personal one, and it's a lot of fun for this particular podcast. The Comeback Graybeard is my personal one. There's a lot more personal. You're going to be bored with my grandchildren. I'll warn you about that up front. But there are certain things that I'll do there, and I interact a lot. And then YouTube, again, it's Valiant Outfitters.
Got it. Well, I'm sure the community is going to be looking forward to, you're so witty, smart, and then also thoughtful in your responses. So I'm sure that will also be reflected in the socials as well. So Joe, thank you for sharing your remarkable journey with us today. Your story powerfully illustrates that it's never too late to reclaim your dreams. For you, it's sparked in high school, and then you courageously, after a career in music, reclaimed it with your UnLost Cause in your 50s. And to the listeners, if Joe's journey inspired you today, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your support helps amplify these incredible stories. Remember, your dreams are waiting. Don't hesitate to chase them. And until next time, keep living your purpose and passion boldly. Thanks again, Joe.
Thanks, David. I really enjoyed it.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets. The UnLost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.